This happened quite a while ago, when I was in elementary school. One day, I was waiting in the classroom for recess to finish, when my usually cold homeroom teacher came over to me. He had a strange expression on his face. Now, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Your mother fainted at work, so I want you to gather your things and go to the teacher's room. Shocked, I grabbed my bag and whatever else I could and went to the teacher's room. The principal was there. "Ah, your father's just gone to the toilet. You can go to the hospital together in a moment." The principal seemed agitated and kept looking at his watch. Sir," I had to tell him. "I don't have a father. It was just me and my mother." The school went into a panic. Even now, we still don't know who that man was. Hey guys, this is your host Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to another episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Starting from this month, episodes will be released fortnightly, rather than weekly. I'm also hoping to translate more stories exclusively for the podcast that you won't find on the website, so keep an eye out for that. Now, on this week's episode, we're going to be looking at a few stories that happened to the authors when they were children. The first takes place very close to where I lived in Japan, so this story has a special place in my heart. A young boy goes to visit his grandparents' chicken farm for the summer holidays, but he soon notices his grandfather going to visit the incubator every day at precisely midday and midnight. When he decides to go and see what's going on, his life is changed forever. Find out what happens in Higyo-sama. They're no longer in business, but my mother's parents used to run a chicken farm in Shimane Prefecture. Every year during the summer holidays, the four of us, my mother, my older sister, my younger brother, and myself, would go to stay with them for a while. My father was never able to get time off work, so he stayed at home. My mother's family home was in Shimane Prefecture, in a village called Ochi. To put it nicely, it was an area of Japan surrounded by the beauty of nature. But, to be more blunt, it was the middle of nowhere. We always stayed there for about a week, and I had fun while my grandparents doted on me. It was the countryside, so they always got up super early and went to bed super early as well. They rose at 4 a.m. before the first rooster's call of the day and began their work on the chicken farm. They would clean the droppings, collect the eggs, check the incubator and do repairs. At around 5 in the evening, they would stop for dinner, and then at around 7, my grandfather would have a drink and doze off. We'd also end up going to bed around 8 p.m, but it was difficult to fall asleep at that time. We'd end up talking about the river we went to that day, what we wanted to do the next day, and it would keep us awake all night. At around midnight, I was staring up at the beams in the roof when I heard the sliding door to my grandfather's room open. The hallway floor creaked, and then someone opened the front door and disappeared outside. I was lying there, half asleep and half awake, when the clock on the wall began to chime 12 times. "Ah, it's this late already?" I thought. 5 minutes later, the front door opened, and I heard the sound of someone removing their sandals at the door. And then the hallway floor creaked, and the door to my grandfather's room closed. Maybe my grandfather or grandmother was going to check on the chickens out in the field, I thought. And shortly thereafter, I finally fell asleep. Next thing I knew, it was morning, and everyone had already eaten breakfast. Everything happened while I was half asleep, so I thought that maybe it was just a dream. But that night, I was again unable to sleep, and at the same time, someone went outside and then returned a short while later. The next day, and then the next day. Always around 11:30 p.m., someone went outside, and around 12:05 a.m., they would return. When I asked my brother and sister about it, neither of them had noticed anything. This was during the time that I was beginning to take an interest in what adults did with their lives. I wanted to see whatever it was this person was doing so late at night. On the 5th day, I did my best to conserve energy so I could stay awake and follow whoever it was when they went outside. Until that point, it had been a bother that I couldn't sleep so easily. But this time, I did my best to stay awake. I nearly fell asleep, but my eyes opened as I realized someone was nearby. I waited until they went outside, and then I grabbed my shoes and followed. I saw my grandfather entering the incubator room, located about 50 meters from the main house. The incubator room was a special building where the eggs were placed in incubators and warmed until they hatched, and the chicks were raised there until a certain period of time. I snuck in after my grandfather. None of the lights were on. I could only rely on the red light coming out of the incubators. Everything was dim, like the kind of darkness you might see if you got in under a kotatsu blanket. My grandfather was looking at the incubators with a serious look on his face. He took out 3 eggs from amongst the incubators, and turning his head away, he smashed them into a nearby metal bin. I was so shocked. I suddenly said, "What are you doing?" My grandfather looked even more surprised than me. I was worried he was going to fall over in shock, but when he realized it was me, relief washed over his face. "Oh, it's just you. Don't scare me like that," he grimaced. "What are you doing?" I asked again. "Taking out the bad eggs," he replied, and started looking at the incubators again. I'd never heard about such a thing, so I asked him, "There are bad chicks?" "Oh yeah, if I don't remove them, then something terrible will happen," he said, and took out another egg from the incubator. I tried to take a closer look, but my grandfather panicked. "Don't look at it! You'll go blind!" he yelled, and quickly broke the egg in the metal bin. I definitely saw a chick inside the egg. Cracks were forming along the outside, like it was just about to hatch. I could imagine what the mess looked like inside the bin, so I didn't want to see it. But my grandfather quickly covered it with a lid anyway. I saw a white piece of paper on the lid. "What's that?" I wondered. But my grandfather looked at his watch and said, "It's past midnight. We're done here for the day. Come on, let's get back to bed." I didn't want to remain in such a scary place by myself at night, so I quickly exited the room. I thought I saw something that looked like a toy next to the incubator room door, but I was tired and a little scared, so I told myself I'd check it out in the morning, and followed my grandfather back to the main house. I spent the rest of the night in my grandfather's room. The next morning, I went to catch bugs with my younger brother, and when we got back, we had an early lunch. But then I realized something was off. Our grandfather's here today, I thought. Come to think of it, I'd never once seen our grandfather eat lunch with us. He always disappeared around 11:30 a.m. On this particular day, he apparently went to see a friend in town early in the morning. He returned around 11 a.m., kinda drunk, and joined us at the table. He ate some white rice with tea and pickled vegetables, and at some point fell asleep face down on the table. We thought it would be bad manners to wake him up, so we left him there and went outside to play. I remembered the thing I saw outside the incubator room the night before, so I went with my brother to go check it out. It wasn't a toy. It was a hand mirror, but the mirrored side had been painted with some type of vermilion-colored paint. There was also a small clay statue of a cow, and a cheap plastic bunch of flowers. They had appeared colourful during the night, which is why they looked like a toy. But what were they used for? I couldn't imagine. I remembered how my grandfather threw the eggs away in the bin the night before. In the darkness, I couldn't see very well, but in the light, I saw old-fashioned lines of kanji I couldn't read on pieces of old-looking paper stuck all over the bin lid. Hey! One's hatching! What? My brother was watching an egg hatch in the incubator. I wanted to see it too, so I opened the door. A chick was inside, but something about it was different to the others. Looking closer, unlike the other chicks, this one wasn't shaking at all, nor was it chirping. And its eyes, they were the eyes of a human. It jumped off the shelf in the incubator and hit the ground with a thud. It didn't even shake its head. It just briskly walked away. I could do nothing but watch in horror. It ran out of the incubator room and turned west, disappearing into the distance. Free of the paralysis that had gripped me, I could finally move again. I looked at my brother. Drool was running down his chin, and his eyes were blank. I called his name over and over, but he didn't respond. I continued screaming his name, and my grandparents came running breathlessly into the room. "Hey! Did you look at it?" I was so scared. "I didn't," I replied. My grandfather looked into my eyes. "You did, didn't you? Where did it go?" The look in his eyes was terrifying. "That way," I said, pointing west. My grandfather grabbed the cow statue and bunch of flowers and took off in the direction I was pointing. My grandmother called my brother's name over and over, but he gave no response as drool continued to trickle down his chin. "He locked eyes with the Higyo-sama, didn't he?" she said, sadness in her voice. "Will he get better?" I asked, my grandmother still looking at the strange state of my brother. "I don't... Grab that red mirror for me, would you?" I handed her the mirror, and she said, "You can't be here. Go see your mother now." I went outside to see my mother and sister, but I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her. My grandmother returned shortly, with my brother in tow. Nothing happened. Thank God, I thought, as I saw my brother walking towards me. But something still felt off. I spoke to him, and it was definitely my brother. He remembered going to the incubator room with me, and what we did the day before, and the day before that. But there was something different about him. My mother noticed as well, and turned to my grandmother. "Mother, he didn't..." My grandmother sadly nodded her head. My mother pulled my younger brother into her arms and began crying. He just stared blankly. My sister looked at him with confusion and fear in her eyes. But when she saw our mother crying, she began too. My grandfather returned shortly thereafter. "It's no good. I wasn't in time." He sadly shook his head. "Grandma, I don't know who it'll be, but it'll happen within the next 2 or 3 days. Can you get out the mourning clothes and air them out for a bit?" Having said that, he grabbed my brother and hugged him. "I'm sorry. This happened because I fell asleep. I'm so sorry." Tears rolled down his cheeks. "Huh? Grandpa, that hurts," my brother said. That voice and those actions were definitely my brother, but at the same time, it wasn't my brother at all. My grandfather spoke to me after. Chicks born when the sun is in the highest point of the sky, and when it's the deepest part of the night, have a certain role. That's why we have to kill them. "So, chicks that hatch at night will become higyo-sama?" I asked. "Who did you hear that?" "So your grandmother told you, huh?" "No, that's not it. No, those that hatch at night become something even more terrifying." He turned towards the incubator room with a grim look on his face. This part of the story ends here. Later, when I was a high school student, one of my classmates also had family that ran a chicken farm. I asked him if he'd ever heard of higyo-sama, but at first he just looked at me confused. Then he said, "Ah, you mean the iwashi chicken?" At any rate, these days technology has advanced and there are sensors and timers on the incubation machines that automatically dispose of eggs that are about to hatch at 12 p.m. and 12 a.m. I still return to Shimane every year. My brother is now working as an elementary school teacher. I don't even remember what he used to be like before all this happened anymore. It's been over 20 years since we all lived together as a family. But we're still absolutely a family. Our last story for this week features a young man who can see ghosts. His family runs a local shrine, and whilst playing there one day, he finds a strange-looking boy. They quickly become friends, but is he really who he says he is? Find out in The Fruit from Ryu-chan. I'm one of those so-called people who can see ghosts. But having said that, I can only see and converse with them. I can't do anything else special. Like, to explain it in easy-to-understand terms, if I go to the scene of an accident, I might see a pale-looking young boy there. Our eyes meet and he shyly looks away. That's it. It's been like this for 20 or so years now. I see these things just like regular human beings, only paler, but for the most part, they've never tried to bring me any harm. Some of them are just standing there, like they're thinking. Others are looking around at nothing in particular. Those that can freely move about of their own free will are quite rare. To be honest, I like the occult, and I'm extremely thankful to be like this. You may say I even feel lucky. Thanks to my love of the occult and my ability to see ghosts, I've had many different experiences. But I don't know if I'm this way naturally. I'd like to tell you about my earliest memory. My family home is a shrine in Omi. You could say it's also like a shop, but for 300 years my father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and so on have worked at the shrine. It was around the time I was about to start going to kindergarten. Every day I ran around the shrine grounds until one day I found a small pond by the hill near the shrine office. The water was clear and it couldn't have been more than 1 meter deep, so I could see the bottom very well. To the side was a rock that was easily bigger than I was at the time. I climbed the rock and jumped down, then climbed the rock and jumped down again. I don't know what was so fun about it, but I was engrossed in it. After one of my many landings later, I suddenly noticed something. I was looking down at the ground, and I could see these small feet wearing zodi, Japanese sandals. I looked up and saw a boy, just slightly taller than me, wearing a strange light blue kimono. "What are you doing?" He looked at me, his expression full of interest. It was a beautiful, androgynous face. I didn't think much more of him than some kid coming to visit the shrine, and started my ritual of climbing the rock again. Without saying a word, he began to imitate me, climbing the rock and jumping down, climbing the rock and jumping down. This amazing game was my idea, so of course I was annoyed, but being a child, we soon made friends. He said his name was Ryuji. I called him Ryu-chan, and we played together at the hill every day after that. Ryu-chan was a master bug catcher, and had expert knowledge about them as well. The first and only time I ever saw a stick insect was when we were playing together. It was around this time that my father told me not to go near the pond by the hill. Of course, it was dangerous for a small child to play in such a place. One day, when I was playing with Ryu-chan by the hill, I found a beautiful rock lying at the bottom of the pond. I stuck my arm into the water to try and grab it. Just a little further. It was that thought that made me careless. My center of gravity shifted forward, and I fell into the abyss of the pond. I panicked. The oxygen was stolen from my lungs, and I couldn't tell up from down, left from right. Which way was up? I wanted to breathe. Suddenly, someone gripped my arm with incredible strength and pulled me out. It was Ryu-chan. Thinking about it now, there was no way a boy of my age would have been strong enough to pull me out of the water alone. Of course, at the time, it didn't even cross my mind. I just sobbed at the fear I felt of drowning and cried all the way home. When my mother saw me dripping wet and crying, she was shocked. I told her I fell into the pond, and a local boy helped me out. She blew her top. She grabbed my arm and dragged me to the shed outside. I hated the gloominess of the place, and in general never went near it. So the fear I felt at being locked in there alone, well, even now I have sympathy for my younger self. I sat alone in the dark shed and cried. But then I felt someone else come inside. My face stiffened, terrified it was a monster or something. But then I relaxed. It was Liu-chan. He sat down next to me, and until my mother came to call me, I fell asleep. Seeing me like that, my mother later said, she realized that I was not the type of kid that a typical scolding would work on. It was from that point that my parents were aware of Liu-chan's existence. He was one of my friends in the neighborhood. That's all they knew about him. Even after I started going to kindergarten and then elementary school, I played with Liu-chan almost every single day. I don't know if he was at the same school as me, but I didn't let the thought bother me very much. When I turned 8, Liu-chan gave me a yellow piece of fruit. We washed it in the pond and ate it together. I remember it being kind of sour and not very nice. When I returned home, I proudly told my parents about it during dinner. I was scared of what they'd do if they knew I was near the pond, so of course I left that part out. They listened to my story, and then I put the remains of the fruit on the table. Their faces, especially my father's, instantly turned blue. First, the fruit was completely rotten. It was so juicy during lunchtime, but now it had turned into a jelly-like state. Glaring at the fruit, my father started questioning me in a harsh tone. I blurted out that I washed it in the pond, and my father grabbed me. Then he ran to my grandfather's room so fast that his legs could barely keep up. "He's been possessed! He's eaten the kinu!" I didn't know what he was saying. My grandfather woke up at his yelling and looked at me absent-mindedly. The old guy from the farm near our shrine came running over, and there was a big fuss in the entranceway. He was in a panic over something. My mother went to deal with him, and then my father and grandfather soon followed. I had no idea what all the noise was about, but when I looked outside, I saw Liu-chan standing on the veranda. He was as beautiful as always. Just one thing was different. He had white hair, which was as long as he was tall. "I'll come to pick you up soon, so wait for me," he said. I nodded my head in return. "When will that be?" Before I had the chance to put it into words, my vision was stolen from me. My grandfather covered me in a linen bag and carried me somewhere. The bag was covered in warm sake before I was put in the car and taken to the city. The car rattled for a while and then finally went quiet. The bag was removed, and my mother and father's worried faces were looking at me. My mother explained to me that I could never go back to the house. My father and grandfather would return, but from now on I was to live with my mother at her parents' house. I innocently said, "Okay," and my parents looked at me with tired faces, but I wasn't especially concerned. I was sad to be parted from my father and grandfather, but I figured that if I ever wanted to see them, they would come to see me. But above all, Liu-chan said that he would come for me, so it would be best if I waited. And just like that, I became a citizen of the old capital, Kyoto. It was around this time that I started to see things. Or maybe it would be better to say that until that point, I had been living with a limited field of vision, and only occasionally encountered things. But I think this is all because of that fruit Ryu-chan gave me. So I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. If there are any other themes or stories you'd like to see in future episodes, you can let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for even more scary content in the future. Thanks guys, and we'll see you again next week for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday and Sunday. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.